Hey, what's going on, everybody? In this video, we're going to be doing a fantasy book review of Only the Stones Survive by Morgan Llywelyn, and this is the first Irish book review that I'm doing for the March Irish Readathon out of the 5, and let's get started. In the broadest sense, this is a work of fiction, but it's quite based on the Irish myths surrounding the founding of Ireland, namely the coming of the Milesians and their displacement of the Tuatha De Danann. The Milesians are essentially the Gaelic Celtic Iron Age warrior society, and the Tuatha De Danann are the sort of quasi-mystical, legendary fairy folk almost. They're humans, but they're just a lot better and a lot fairer than, average people. But the problem is they still use bronze weapons, and that's the major reason why they are displaced by the Milesians. Now, I did have some problems with this book, and not just because I don't know much about Celtic mythology, but basically the biggest problem I had with the book was a lot of the characters are kind of tropey and caricatures, especially on the Milesian side. They're basically just portrayed as, they're the new coming warrior class type people, and they just like fighting and killing and warring and drinking and feasting and that sort of thing. And as well as some of the major characters are loosely based on real characters from the mythology. This, namely the 5 brothers who lead the Milesians, but they're basically also classed almost as tropes. You have like the 2 feuding warrior kings, and you have the druid and the bard, and that sort of stuff. So they kind of aren't super fleshed out, and I felt that was definitely a weakness in the book. Also, there are some plot holes. The main character on the Tuatha De Danann side is Joss, who starts off the book as an adolescent, but there's a scene later in the book when basically it's coming to the point where he has to take over what's left of his culture, and lead his people basically to safety. But since he's like a kid at the beginning of the book, as he's growing up, this sort of stuff is happening, but he's still not an adult yet. But then all of a sudden, overnight, one night, he wakes up and he realizes he's like a full-grown man. And there's really no explanation for that. It's basically, it's just Tuatha De Danann magic. And a lot of the things on the Tuatha De Danann side, I don't know much about Celtic mythology, but there was one thing they kept referring to, namely they could summon the Earth Killers to defeat the Milesians, but partly why the Tuatha De Danann get basically overrun and defeated by the Milesians is, for the most part, even though they're willing to fight, they're almost too pure and too nice to do so, and they end up not wanting to be basically as bad as the invaders. But I guess they have a weapon known as the Earth Killers, or they can summon the Earth Killers, basically, and it's hinted at that would destroy the incoming Milesians, but they're not summoned because basically wiping out a whole people would make them pretty much evil too. So, but it's not really described what the Earth Killers are, and I have absolutely no idea like what it's referring to. Now, there were some good parts to the book. Namely, I felt that it covered a very good subject matter. Basically, it's a story. It's not just a coming-of-age story for Joss, but it's also a story about basically when civilizations or when cultures collide, and about how basically one has to assimilate with the other or they're basically wiped out. Because the ending of the book, I enjoyed the ending of the book. It's kind of a spoiler, but it's pretty obvious what happens, is, especially if you know Celtic mythology, the Tuatha De Danann basically become the gods of the Gaelic peoples of Ireland. But namely, the Tuatha De Danann and what's left of them after a long war with the Milesians is they kind of fade into the background and blend with the Milesian society, and they allow themselves sort of to accept that their time has like come and gone, and to let the Milesians have Ireland. Now, overall, I felt the book was pretty charming in that it does convey the story of basically a culture accepting its own fate and allowing a new culture basically to have the limelight for a time. But like I said, there were a lot of the characters just were not fleshed out enough for my taste. And largely for that reason, I'm giving the book 3.5 stars out of 5. I feel if you were more well-versed than I am with the Gaels and early Celtic mythology and legends, you probably get more out of this book. But since I am pretty much starting from scratch, I was lost a little bit. And like I said, 3.5 out of 5 stars to Morgan Llywelyn's Only the Stone Survive. And remember, read victoriously.